What's up, everybody? I just put up a new Autopsy Rants video, and in that 25 to 30 minute rant that I did, I mentioned my personal COVID story of when I got COVID, and of course my wife has now had it twice. And I put all that in there, but I would like to make a more succinct video that will just directly address my COVID story, just to get it out there. Okay, so back in September, my wife got COVID for the first time. The only symptoms that she had was the smell and taste thing. Other than that, you would never even know she was sick. Okay, so December rolls around, and we and a bunch of our friends and stuff have this kind of like, we're just kind of coughing crap up. We're not sick. We're not bedridden or anything even close to that. It's just like, oh, fuck. The weather's getting cold again. So people got allergies. And all of us are getting tested once we start getting shit like this, especially me, because I haven't been sick in like 2 years. And it's like, okay, well, now I'm starting to get like a little bit of phlegm and stuff. Okay, let's get tested. All of us get tested negative. Not COVID. It's just some crap that's going around, that's been going around. I've had family members since Thanksgiving having it. Okay, so now we're in the beginning of December. We're all testing for it. We've got, coughing this crap up. Don't have COVID. About a week and a half later, after I went to my cousin's graduation for her master's degree, a few days after that, I'm like, oh man, I kind of feel, I don't have a fever, but I kind of feel like one's creeping up on me. And that's already like, okay, well, I should just go ahead and schedule a test for COVID. I do that. The next morning I wake up and I have a fever of 101. And, I call into work, tell them like, hey, I know the procedure, whatever. I'm getting tested today. We'll see what's going on. I'll let y'all know. So I go and get tested that day. By the time I go to get tested, my fever's already gone. I took a couple of ibuprofen. The fever was done. And I go and I get tested around noon that day. Around 2 o'clock, they give me the results. And they're like, hey, you tested positive. I'm like, okay, so I got to call into work, all that kind of stuff. I'm going to get 10 days off from work, get paid for it. So, okay, cool. By this point, I don't feel anything. I'm like, okay, I know I'm positive, but I don't feel anything. So I tell my wife that. She's like, oh my God, because the first time she had COVID, I had tested like 2 times that during her having it the first time, and I never had it. And we never separated at all. We stayed, obviously we lived together. We did everything a normal married couple does the whole time she had it, and I never got it. So this time she's like, oh my God, okay, you got it. So she goes and gets tested. Now she's got it. She's got it again for the second time. But again, aside from us, we're like, just coughing up a little bit of phlegm and stuff. Aside from that, neither of us have any symptoms related to COVID because we had all that shit before we got COVID. Okay, so there's none of that at all. There's no fever. There's no bedridden. We're both just getting paid to have 10 days off around holiday time. So my COVID experience of beating COVID, like the first day I just took some Dayquil because I didn't want my fever to come back, but it never did. And basically my entire 10 days off with COVID was drinking Yingling Light, which we have here in Texas now, by the way. Drinking Yingling Light and vitamin C. That was it. And we survived. Yeah, no shit, we survived. Because the survival rate for a dude my age is 99.97%. I knew that going in. I've been saying this for like 2 years. I've been saying for like 2 fucking years that I guarantee you I'm eventually going to get COVID, which all of us are eventually going to get COVID. I'm pretty sure. That, it's probably going to be about like a cold, maybe even the flu, but we'll get over it. It wasn't even that for me. And I'm not vaccinated. My wife isn't vaccinated. If we had been vaccinated, people would say, well, the only reason it was so mild was because you're vaccinated. I'm not vaccinated and she's not vaccinated, not because we're anti-vax. I've had that argument with dense motherfuckers that I would just never convince that I'm not anti-vax. I'm glad my parents told me they were vaccinated. They've been vaccinated for almost a year now. Like as soon as vaccines were available for them, they got them. And I said, great. That's awesome. That's something like that y'all won't have to worry about because you're getting older. My grandparents being vaccinated. Great. We've seen all these people that I personally know, at least 40 people that I personally know have had COVID at least once. All of them are fine. The only one that had a hard time with it was my 84-year-old grandmother who had COVID and pneumonia at the same time. And she wasn't vaccinated. And when I found out she wasn't vaccinated, I was like, what are you doing? You're 84 years old. Why are you not? Why are you taking your chances with this crap? And now you could say a guy like me is taking his chances with this crap, but a guy like me has not been sick in like 2 fucking years. A guy like me now can tell you, because I've had COVID, this thing was weak even by cold standards. Like the fact that I was still like coughing up the phlegm or whatever, but I never even had a sore throat during the whole thing. For me, I'm not talking for everybody else. There are plenty of people who have died from this thing, obviously. But for me, for my wife who's had it twice, and for the other 39 people that we know that have had COVID, they've been absolutely fine. But we knew that going in. Like my age bracket for my gender is 99.97%. And for my wife, who's a female in her age bracket, it's even better. So we knew going in, we're not going to be knocking on death's door whenever we catch this thing, if we ever do. She's had it twice. I've had it once now. For me, it was absolutely nothing. For her, it was even less. I guess unless you count the fact that her smell and her taste were gone for a little while. But it's interesting because, like, even when was telling people this, they're telling me, like, over the phone or whatever, like, oh, man, like, how did you do? And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I've got it right now. Like, oh, you got COVID? Like, yeah, dude, I've got COVID right now. Like, well, man, you don't sound that bad. It's like, well, no, because I don't feel that bad. I feel the same way. I'm just kind of, my nose may be a little stopped up. I'm coughing up some phlegm. But just trying to explain to people, like, when they talk about following the science, and I've been hearing that shit for 2 years now. Like, well, let's look at the science. The hospitalization rate for vaccinated people with COVID is 0.01%. That's incredibly low. The hospitalization rate for the unvaccinated is 0.89%. That means overall you have a hospitalization rate of under 1%, whether you're vaccinated or not, and you get COVID. Now that's kind of frustrating considering that they shut the fucking world down for this thing. And that they're looking at vaccine mandates for businesses. Talking about 100 million people are about to be forced to be vaccinated or provide weekly testing. That's fucking frustrating when you look at the numbers like that. And they'll scare the shit out of you by saying things like, oh, well, you don't understand. You're 14 to 18 times or whatever more likely to be hospitalized if you aren't vaccinated. What they don't tell you is that with a total hospitalization rate of less than 1% overall, that's vaccinated or unvaccinated, the vast majority of people who catch COVID are not only not going to die, but they're not even going to have to go to the hospital. Now that matters, man. And where does most of this come from? Most of this isn't coming from the right wing. This isn't coming from libertarians. Most of this is coming from Democrats and left-leaning people. And I have more science to back that up, or at least have polls and research and studies done on this. Over half of Democrats polled think the number of people who are going to be hospitalized for getting COVID is over half. Over 50% of people. And that's the majority of Democrats who've been polled. This is according to Pew Research. Now, the reason they think this is because they've been fed fear porn straight for 2 fucking years. That is a steady diet, my friends. And now look where we're at. We're at the president imposing a mandate on any business with more than 100 people. Now, I talked on this in the Autopsy Rants video that I've just recently uploaded, and that's even more frustrating because you see that same sort of fear porn mentality coming from liberal justices on the Supreme Court. Now, this is not to praise conservatives. This is to say, look at the retarded shit coming out of the mouths of at least 2 of the 3 liberal justices on the Supreme Court, Kagan and Sotomayor to be specific. I don't think they understand what their job is, and if they do, what they're doing is not what they're supposed to be doing. They're not supposed to be ruling on whether or not they think vaccines are good ideas. They're not supposed to be ruling on whether or not they think it's beneficial for the public to get vaccinated. Their ruling is on whether or not it is constitutional for the president to direct OSHA to impose this on businesses. That isn't the entirety of their job. And it doesn't sound like they're doing that, at least according to their statements, especially the one making the rounds now is Sotomayor's laughably wrong statement about the severity of COVID to children. She said that there are 100,000 children in serious condition in hospitals around America right now because of Omicron and COVID. That is a level of wrong that you can't just use the word wrong to describe it. It's abhorrently wrong. It's outrageously wrong. Not even close to the science. Even Fauci, a few days before that, was on ABC News, I believe it was, saying that kids in hospital with COVID aren't typically there because of COVID. They're there, and then when they test positive for COVID. So the distinction being not there for COVID, they're there with COVID. And even Fauci said this, which is also frustrating because motherfuckers like me have been saying that for about a year and a half now. But Fauci didn't go far enough. As much as I want to give him some credit for that, he didn't go far enough because it ain't just kids, dude. It's anybody who goes to the hospital that has to take a COVID test to get admitted to the hospital. A lot of those motherfuckers, too, show up with COVID. They're not there for COVID. They're there with COVID. And then we see that playing out now with Omicron, which is much more contagious, right? Much less lethal. So now when you're seeing all these news stories that are blowing up your feed, that hospitalization rates are spiking to never before seen levels with people admitted for COVID, take that into account. Because what we know about Omicron is it is extremely contagious and not lethal. Not very lethal at all in comparison to the others. But it's funny how this misinformation game works. And no, honestly, and this is another little side note here, I don't think I touched in the Autopsy Rants video, but it should bother everybody that the White House has said they're going around social media to flag content that they find to be misleading so it can be removed, and that the people who spread this false information about COVID should not only be removed from that outlet, they should be blacklisted from any social media. That should bother the fuck out of people too. That is a clusterfuck of government power in and of itself. But you'll notice that it's rarely ever the misinformation that hypes the virus. The misinformation that tries to make it seem much more lethal than it actually is, that will catch the ire of the establishment because that helps them in their narrative. And again, like I talked about in the Autopsy Rants video, there should be penalties for the Biden administration and any presidential administration that wants to push something they know SCOTUS is eventually going to strike down. They know it, but they just think in the meantime, this will basically scare people into getting vaccinated. Like, that's wrong. I don't give a shit what you think about the vaccines. I'm pro-vaccine. I just don't think motherfuckers like me should be forced to get it. I don't think anybody should be forced to get it, but motherfuckers like me or my wife are the vast majority of people who are like, dude, this thing's like a cold. I don't want to have to get vaccinated for the cold. Bill Maher just came out recently talking about the boosters. He's like, look, I didn't want to get the vaccine in the first place, but I took one for the team. But now you're telling me like every 4 to 6 months, I'm going to have to go get another shot. He's like, I'm good. He said, I've had COVID. I have the antibodies. Like, what? Maybe that shouldn't be a one size fits all for everybody. And I agree with him. Nobody should be forced to get it to begin with. But if you want to get it and it's there for you, go fucking get it. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that we have that option to go and get a COVID vaccine if we want to get the COVID vaccine. That's freedom. That's the way that should work. The way it shouldn't work is basically tyrannical state governments imposing their will on everybody. I'm against that shit if you haven't noticed.